So now I'd like to hand over to Jenny, who is the main reason you're here, to tell us about her landscape design.
Well, thank you very much, first to Brian and Martin, for the opportunity to work on this amazing job. And then again for the opportunity to talk about it today, because honestly I cannot tell you what an exciting and inspiring job it's been. So in the thinking of the planning, there were two factors obviously. There are two sort of threads, almost like the warp and weft of a fabric. And the warp is, it's going to be a place that's absolutely great for children. And the weft is that, as well as that, it's going to be a great place for wildlife, because it's a big space, and you know there's obviously a lot of wildlife round about, and to have it within this area for the school will be, I feel, very educational for us. You know, I mean, compared to living in the middle of Birmingham, it's just great. So those are the two things. Now, in order to guide the choice of plants, there are three strands there. The first one is what we've already got, the site that's already here. You can see it's lovely and open and sunny. You can see there's a bit of a slope. What you can't actually see today, but anybody local will probably know, in the winter it's extremely squelchy and extremely soggy. So that is something that kind of governed the choice of planting to start with. You know, no big drifts of lavender, no gorgeous stands of cistus, because they'll just die in the winter. But lots of little clusters of dogwoods, some willows, elderberry, those sort of things, they all like it. And a lot of herbaceous perennials that have big leaves that actually appreciate the damp. Also, they're all plants that can get through the winter year after year after year, because the last thing you need is to have to keep replacing stuff. So that was the first strand, and that's kind of the category of planting that all the other decisions are referred back to that. Will it be okay? So then the next strand was the making it wildlife friendly. Because, you know, this is a great big space, and we don't, well, it's obviously going to be full of children, but I imagined it also full of all sorts of insects, birds, animals. I mean, perhaps not lions and tigers, but, you know, voles and shrews and mice and rabbits and anyway, lots and lots of variety, and frogs and toads and newts, because we're near to the stream down there. So that's a guideline. So all the things I chose, you know, you think, is this going to be any good for wildlife? So there's no lots of multi-petaled roses like those that have won prizes in the marquee there. And there's none of those many petaled peonies, because insects cannot fight their way into those to get the nectar. So they're neither use nor ornament. So nothing like that. But plants with big flat flower heads, you know, like achillea and like cow parsley, those sort of things, and anything with a daisy structure. They are all absolutely first class for insects, hoverflies, butterflies, bees, moths, all sorts, and those pollinating wasps. So they're all very helpful. So that sort of governs your choice. A lot of things I try, it's not all, but predominantly things are indigenous. You know, things that have been growing here in Northern Europe since the last ice age, because those plants will support the widest variety of insects and birds and creatures that we have living here. So that's a lot of it, and that particularly shows up in the boundary planting, the hedging that goes all round the edge. That's all, without exception, that's all indigenous stuff. So that's helpful for the wildlife. So that's part of it. The other things were trying to make sure that there is a continuous season of flower. So it's not one thing flowering forever, but there are all the varieties chosen will give us a range of flowers that go right through the year. So you know, we'd start off in January with hazel catkins and snowdrops perhaps, and there'd be things every month right through to December, when you've got the winter viburnum and winter flowering iris, the iris stylosa. So there's something all the year round, because particularly the solitary bees that live in stony banks and rickety old walls and things, they rather rashly come out of their little nests on a sunny January morning, just thinking, oh, might be spring. Out they come, and if they can't find any nectar, then before they manage to get back to their nest, they've starved to death. So I know it sounds a bit dramatic, but it is very crucial that all these creatures have food right through the year. So that's one of the things governing the choice of the planting as well. And with the winter in mind, there are also a predominance of shrubs and trees that have some sort of fruit. Either fruit as we understand it, or berries, or hips, or haws, anything that will feed all the birds when the insects are in short supply, and seeds that will drop for mice, and nuts that will be in the hazel for squirrels. So those are those strands that work together to make this warp thread, or maybe it was the weft. Anyway, but one lot of the threads. So then the next category is what's good for children. And so the whole planting here is that it will interest and inspire the children and the teachers right through the year, year after year. So with that in mind, I'll just say this, with that in mind, because I wanted the children to be touching things and stroking them and so on, like stroking the llamas. So there is nothing, apart from the hawthorn in the boundary hedge, there's nothing prickly and there's nothing poisonous. So hopefully, you know, even if they eat things that you really think they better not, they'll be all right. So that's in mind. So first of all, to get children's interest is colour. So I think it'll be up there, you know, there's a carpet of bluebells, there are big drifts of scarlet crocosmia, and there are swathes of purple-leafed begonia and purple-leafed heuchera and silver-leafed lamium. So there are all these different colours, as well as the flowers, and also leaf texture. So, you know, there's this wonderful golden hop there, and the leaves are just exquisite. They're lovely. So they're interesting. And obviously there are oval leaves, but there are filigree leaves from aquilegias, a big range of shapes, and then a range of textures, because this is, I want everybody to stroke things and fiddle with them. So there's the furry leaf Stachys lanata, there's fluffy pennisetum grass, and then there are the polished things like begonia, like little mirrors almost. So there are all those things to do with the leaves. And wherever possible, whatever variety, whatever families of plants I'd chosen, I then chose fragrant varieties. Because apparently our sense of smell remains the clearest right through our lives. So, I mean, I can remember when I was barely 4 years old, 3 or 4 years old, whenever I smell a hawthorn hedge in flower, I can smell that. And I remember walking with my dad along this cinder path to get to the garage where he kept the car, where truly, I don't exaggerate, he was taking the radiator out or putting it back in every single weekend. So those fragrances, you know, they stay with us all our lives. So I think that's a wonderful thing for children to remember back to. So every time they smell something like that, they'll remember, oh yeah, that was when we were at school at Uplyme. So that's that. So there are those are kind of the physical things that I looked for when I was choosing the planting. But then because it's a school, there was one further kind of strain that I wanted to take on board, and that was looking at these plants as not only of interest in themselves, but as inspiration for further work, for creative writing, for creative projects, drawing, painting, sewing, all those sort of things. So there is, so I chose plants that I thought would do that. And there's the pocket handkerchief tree, the Davidia, which is this one here. And its little flowers are barely bigger than a thumbnail, but it has this big bract behind it, which is like a leaf, and it's creamy. And every flower has one of these things dangling behind it. And when the wind blows, they're all blowing about. And at a pinch, you could say, yeah, they do look like people waving their handkerchiefs. And you could take your children and they'd see that and say, well, now who do you think these trees are waving to? Are they waving to the very new children who are coming into the reception class? Or are they waving goodbye to somebody, maybe to the year sixes who are off to Woodruff or whatever? And they could write about who they thought was visiting, who the tree was waving to. They could draw who the tree was waving to or waving goodbye to. I really feel that the sky is the limit in a way with those things. So there's the pocket handkerchief, and then there's Lamium Ghost, which is one of these silver leaf ground cover things. And you could imagine the discussion then. Well, have you ever seen a ghost? Have you? What do you think they look like? Would you be scared if you met a ghost? Would you go with it if it said, come and see where I live? It lends itself to all sorts of poems and stories and little discussions, maybe even little plays, I don't know. And then there's something called Hordium jubatum, which is actually squirrel tail grass. And it's a single stalk like that, and then the seed head bends backwards with lots of little whiskers, a bit like the long hair on that llama. And it's called squirrel tail. And when you see it in a crowd, it looks like a scurry of squirrels making their way somewhere. So, there's the discussion there. Are these squirrels running towards something gorgeous? Or are they running away from something terrifying? And you could draw pictures of what they were running to or from, tell stories about it, all that sort of thing. So all the plants, if you look at the names, a lot of the plants have names that you think, oh yes, that could lend itself to something interesting. And just lastly, the common names of things are wonderful. And there's Aquilegia, which is granny's bonnets. And I thought, maybe that would lead to the designing of some gorgeous hats or headwear for school sports day or the Christmas Carol concert. And there's actually a picture on the board here of a very exotic hat at Chelsea Flower Show, which I thought, I'm sure the children here could do even better. So that sort of thing. And things like foxgloves, digitalis, that's foxgloves. Would that lend itself to learning to knit or to felt or to sew and make some winter mittens for somebody, for something? So the last thing is that when you think of these common names, there is just one example. There's rabbit's ears, which is Pennisetum, and there's lamb's ears, which is Stachys, and there's elephant's ears, which is Beginia, and there's even mouse's ears, something, but I dismissed that because it's so tiny, I thought it'll get stamped on. But, then you get this discussion. With all these ears, would these things be hearing all sorts of secrets that the children are whispering to one another, or the teachers are whispering to one another? And what sort of secrets might they be? You could write a whole poem about that. And even Well, supposing the lamb's ears told the sparrows, and suppose the sparrows then told the secret onto the squirrels, and suppose the squirrels passed the secret onto the seagulls, and then suppose the seagulls went down to the beach and broadcast it all along the coast. You know, would it be a bit like Chinese whispers? Would you recognise the secret that came out on the beach that started off in Uplyme? Go. So you can see what a wonderful time I've had doing this job, and I do so hope that it will bring decades of delight to all the children in Uplyme, and you know, years of inspiration to the teachers who teach in Mrs. Ethelston's school. Thank you.
Thanks,